Have you ever stepped into a place and felt, before you even said a word, that you didn't belong there? That's exactly what washed over Emma the morning she started her first official day on the job. She stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the glass tower that seemed to scrape the sky. The reflection staring back at her in the window was not what she thought a new hire should look like. Her jacket was worn at the sleeves, her bag hung from a strap she had sewn back on herself, and her shoes carried the dust of her hometown. In a city where appearances seemed like currency, Emma felt broke before she even walked inside. Back home, things were different. Her small rural town had no need for glossy resumes or polished shoes. People left their doors unlocked, and neighbours stopped by unannounced just to talk. For years she had worked at the local diner, wiping down counters, refilling coffee, saving every tip she could. After her parents passed, she became the one her younger brother looked up to, the one who had to hold things together when life fell apart. She had dreamed of this chance, a new start in the city, a job that could prove she was more than her circumstances. When the offer letter finally came, she packed her life into 2 suitcases, kissed her brother goodbye, and promised she'd make it worth it. But promises were easier to carry than courage. As she pushed open the revolving doors, her stomach knotted tighter. The lobby was a world she had only ever seen in movies. Marble floors polished like mirrors, employees striding past with coffee cups and perfect hair, their confidence filling the room like perfume. Emma clutched her bag closer. Just get through today, she told herself. Blend in, don't give them a reason to laugh. What she didn't know was that upstairs, someone was already waiting to test her. And by the end of the day, keeping her head down would no longer be an option. The elevator ride up felt like an eternity. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the glowing numbers, pretending not to notice the whispers. A woman in a tailored blazer leaned toward the man beside her, murmuring something that made him smirk. Emma didn't catch the words, but she didn't need to. The sideways glances said enough. To them, she was out of place. When the doors slid open, the group spilled out as if they owned the floor. Emma followed behind, clutching her bag, her heart hammering in her chest. The office stretched wide and bright, rows of desks, glass partitions, the hum of keyboards blending with the buzz of conversation. Everyone seemed to move with purpose, as though they'd rehearsed their roles for years. In the middle of it all stood a man leaning against a desk, his hair slicked back, his posture relaxed but sharp, like someone who enjoyed being in control. This was Richard, the floor manager. He had built a reputation for being quick with numbers but quicker with insults. Lately, though, whispers said his team's performance was slipping and the pressure from above was mounting. To Richard, Emma was perfect, an easy target, someone he could belittle to remind everyone he was still in charge. "So, you're Emma," he said, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. His eyes scanned her jacket, her bag, her nervous stance. "Straight out of some farm town, right? Guess we're lowering our standards these days." A ripple of quiet laughter moved across the room. Emma felt heat rush to her cheeks, her throat tightening. She wanted to defend herself, to say she had earned her place here, but her voice refused to come. Instead, she nodded politely. "Yes, I'm Emma." Richard smirked, waving her toward a desk pushed against the far wall, right next to a drafty window and the humming printer. "That's your spot. You'll handle the small stuff, copies, errands, whatever keeps the wheels turning. Let's see if you make it through the week." Emma slid into the chair, the legs scraping against the floor, every sound magnified in her ears. She opened her notebook and pretended to write, anything to steady her shaking hands. Around her, conversations carried on, but she could feel the stares, curious, dismissive, waiting for her to trip. She forced herself to breathe. Her brother's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't let them scare you." But sitting there in the corner, invisible yet exposed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Richard wasn't finished with her, and before long he would make sure of it. When noon rolled around, the office emptied fast. Groups formed at the door, co-workers laughing as they grabbed their coats, debating whether to hit the sandwich shop or the sushi place down the block. Emma lingered by her desk for a moment, hoping someone might turn and ask if she wanted to join. But no one did. They left in pairs and trios, their voices fading down the hallway until she was the only one left. She finally grabbed her bag and slipped outside. The air was brisk, the kind that stung her cheeks. Across the street, a fast food place glowed with its familiar neon sign. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and right now it was better than sitting alone in the break room. Emma ordered the smallest meal on the board and carried it to a booth in the corner. The seat was cracked vinyl, the fries a little too salty, but at least it was quiet. She unwrapped her sandwich slowly, her appetite gone before she even took a bite. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah lit up the screen. "Remember, Em, you know more than you think. Don't let them scare you." Emma stared at the words, her throat tightening. For a moment, she pictured Sarah across from her, laughing the way they used to after long shifts at the diner. But all she saw was her own reflection in the greasy window, a reminder of how far she was from home and how alone she felt here. She pulled her notebook from her bag and opened it on the table. Page after page of scribbles greeted her, notes she had started on the bus ride into the city, ideas she had collected late at night when sleep wouldn't come. She added to it now, writing down bits she had overheard that morning. Client retention, campaign not landing, budget cuts. Nothing earth-shattering, but details mattered, they always had. Emma tapped the pen against the page, the sound steadying her. Maybe this job wasn't just about surviving Richard's taunts. Maybe it was about proving, if only to herself, that she had something to offer. She tucked the notebook back into her bag and finished her fries, though they were cold by then. The doubt still sat heavy in her chest, but alongside it was a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. What Emma didn't realise was that before the week was over, the same notebook she clutched for comfort would become the very thing that forced everyone else in that office to finally see her. The next morning, Emma kept her head down and focused on small tasks. She ran copies, filed papers, tried to stay invisible. But mid-morning, Richard called her into the conference room to help out. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Managers leaned over spreadsheets, analysts flipped through reports, the hum of conversation filling the space. Emma hovered by the side wall, unsure of where to stand. Eventually, she figured out her role: refill water pitchers, clear empty cups, and stay out of the way. Still, she couldn't help listening. Words floated through the air like puzzle pieces. Retention rates, client drop-off, budget bleeding. She wasn't looking for secrets. She just wanted to understand the language to make sense of the world she was now part of. While she wiped crumbs from the table, she slipped her notebook from her bag and jotted down a few phrases. To her, it was harmless, just a way to learn. But then a shadow fell across the page. Richard's voice dropped low. "Taking notes, country girl?" he murmured, his smile sharp. "What is this? Your diary about city life?" Emma's hand froze mid-word. She looked up, caught in his stare. I'm just trying to learn," she said softly. Richard leaned closer, his tone coated in false sweetness. "Learn faster. And remember, you're here to make coffee, not strategy." Then, as quickly as he appeared, he straightened up and turned to the rest of the room. "Water, please," he called out, his voice louder now, casual, as if nothing had happened. A few heads turned toward Emma, and she felt heat crawl up her neck. She closed the notebook and tucked it back into her bag, her pulse racing. For a second, she thought about tearing out the page and throwing it away. But she didn't. She kept it, pressing her hand over the cover like it was the only solid thing she had. Back at her desk, the words Richard whispered replayed in her head, stinging more than the laughter from the day before. He wanted her small, invisible, disposable. Emma stared at her notebook again. Not yet, she thought. She wasn't ready to give up on it, or on herself. She didn't know it then, but before the day was over, Richard would find a new way to put her on the spot, and this time the whole office would be watching. By midweek, Emma thought she had figured out how to survive. Stay quiet, follow instructions, keep her head down. But Richard wasn't about to let her fade into the background. He wanted an audience. That afternoon, the conference room was packed. Managers, analysts, interns, all gathered for a team meeting. Emma was asked to bring in a tray of coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she balanced the cups. She moved carefully between the tables, the smell of roasted beans drifting upward as she set each cup in front of its owner. Just as she placed the last one down, Richard leaned back in his chair, his grin wide enough for everyone to see. "Well, since you're already here," he said, his voice loud and casual, "why don't you introduce yourself to the team?" The room stilled. Dozens of eyes shifted toward Emma. She clutched the empty tray tighter, her heart thudding in her chest. She opened her mouth, ready to say something simple, but Richard cut her off. "What's wrong? Stage fright?" His tone dripped with mockery. Then he added with a smirk, "Maybe you'd be more comfortable back on the farm." A ripple of laughter moved across the room, not cruel enough to be shouted, but sharp enough to sting. Emma's cheeks burned, her throat tightening until it felt hard to breathe. For a split second, she thought about bolting, leaving the tray and running straight out the door. But before she could move, a quiet voice spoke from the far end of the table. "Hey," the intern said, his tone steady. "Let her talk, we've all had a first day." The laughter faltered. A few people looked down at their notes, suddenly less amused. Even Richard's smile slipped for half a second. Emma's fingers trembled against the tray. She wanted to disappear, but she also felt something new, a tiny push of courage rising in her chest. She lowered the tray onto the table and drew a shaky breath. "Actually," she said softly, her voice unsteady but audible, "if it's all right, I'd like to share something." Every conversation in the room stopped. Phones were set aside, pens stilled. For the first time since she started, the entire office was waiting to hear what Emma had to say. The silence in the room stretched thin. Emma felt the weight of every eye on her, her pulse thudding in her ears. She could have laughed it off, could have taken the safe way out and hurried back to her desk, but something inside her refused. She set the tray down on the table and pulled her notebook from her bag. The familiar worn cover steadied her hands. "I've been paying attention," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I noticed a few things." Richard chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "This ought to be good." Emma ignored him. She walked slowly to the end of the table where a laptop sat open, connected to the projector. It had been left there for the meeting, waiting for whoever needed it. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, then found the file she had quietly built weeks before. Slides she had worked on late at night in her small apartment, fueled by determination more than sleep. The first chart flickered onto the screen. "I think we're missing a piece," she said, her voice steadier now. "We spend a lot on campaigns, but we're not meeting people where they actually spend their time. Younger audiences are moving faster than we are." She clicked to the next slide, showing trends in online behaviour, graphs she had pieced together from public reports and customer feedback. It doesn't have to cost more, it's about listening better, about shifting our focus to where conversations are already happening. The room, once restless, was quiet now. A few heads tilted, pens hovered in mid-air. Even Gloria, who had seemed distant earlier, leaned forward, her expression intent. Emma kept going, each word stronger than the last. "If we adjust even part of our budget, we can reach twice as many people without wasting resources on campaigns that aren't working." She finished with a slide showing clear comparisons, her heart racing but her voice steady. She closed the notebook and stepped back. For a long beat, no one spoke. The silence was no longer mocking. It was thoughtful, curious. Emma's palms were damp, but her shoulders lifted slightly. For the first time since she walked into this building, she didn't feel small, she felt seen. And just when Richard opened his mouth to dismiss her, Gloria's pen tapped against the table, cutting him off. The quiet in the room was thick, but it wasn't the same silence Emma had felt before. This time it was sharper, like people were weighing her words instead of dismissing them. Then Gloria spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, but it cut through the air. "You built this yourself?" Emma nodded, her hands clasped around her notebook. "Yes, ma'am. From public records, customer feedback, industry reports. I wanted to understand where we really stand. I thought maybe it could help." Gloria's eyes lingered on the slide still glowing on the screen. She tapped her pen against the table once, twice, then set it down. "This is good work, thorough, and it raises questions we should have been asking." A murmur rippled across the room. One of the younger analysts leaned toward his neighbour, whispering something. Another scribbled notes quickly, as if afraid to miss a point. The dismissive smirks that had filled the room earlier were gone, replaced by something Emma hadn't seen all week. Interest. Richard shifted in his seat, forcing out a laugh that sounded hollow. "Come on, let's not get carried away. She's been here, 2 days? Anybody can throw a few charts together." But his words landed flat. No one laughed. Gloria's gaze snapped to him, her tone firm. Richard, fresh eyes often catch what the rest of us overlook. That's the value of new perspectives. Emma's chest tightened, though this time it wasn't fear, it was relief. Someone was standing up for her, and not just anyone. Gloria had the authority to quiet Richard with a single sentence. One of the analysts raised his hand. If she's right, we've been pouring money into the wrong places. This could change how we approach the next quarter. Emma swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected anyone to agree, let alone defend her. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Richard sat stiffly, his jaw tight, the easy confidence he wore like armour beginning to crack. And Emma, still holding her notebook close, realised the balance in the room had shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. When the meeting wrapped up, people drifted out in pairs, still murmuring about Emma's slides. A few glanced at her with something that almost looked like respect. Emma kept her head down, gathering her notebook, ready to retreat to her desk. "Emma," Gloria's voice called. It wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to stop her in her tracks. "Walk with me." Emma followed her down the hall, nerves buzzing. She half expected a lecture about overstepping. Maybe she had embarrassed the department, maybe she'd crossed a line. But Gloria led her into a quiet office, shut the door and motioned to a chair. "Sit." Emma lowered herself into the seat, clutching her notebook like armour. Gloria studied her for a moment before speaking. "That took guts," she said plainly. "Not just the research, standing up in a room like that after the way Richard treated you." Emma's cheeks warmed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, I just wanted to help. I don't want to be the joke in the corner." Gloria leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "You're not a joke. What you showed in there, that's initiative. That's the kind of thinking this company needs." She paused, her tone sharpening. "But you also need to understand, not everyone will welcome it. Richard won't forget being embarrassed. Some people here will see you as a threat." Emma swallowed, nodding. She knew it already. The way Richard glared at her, the whispers outside the room. She felt them in her bones. Gloria's expression softened. "Listen, tomorrow the board is meeting. They want updates on strategy and I'm leading the presentation. I want you in that room with me. Share some of what you showed today. Not everything, just enough to make them see what you can do." Emma's heart thudded. The board, the people who decided where the company was headed. Her stomach flipped between pride and panic. I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. Gloria gave a faint smile. "Nobody's ever ready their first time, but you've got something they need to hear. That notebook of yours, it's more valuable than you think." Emma gripped the notebook tighter, her knuckles pale. She had dreamed of an opportunity like this, but now that it was real, it felt almost too big. Gloria stood, placing a steady hand on Emma's shoulder. "Sleep on it, but be ready tomorrow. This is your shot." Emma nodded, her chest tight with fear and determination all tangled together. She didn't know what scared her more, failing in front of the board, or finally proving she wasn't the girl everyone thought she was. By the next morning, Emma could feel the shift before she even reached her desk. Conversations hushed when she walked past, and eyes followed her in a way they hadn't before. Some glances carried curiosity, a few even respect. Others held something sharper, skepticism, envy, the kind of looks that said, "Who does she think she is?" She slid into her seat, trying to steady her breathing. The young intern appeared a moment later, dropping a yellow sticky note onto her desk with a quick smile before hurrying away. "You've got this," it read in messy handwriting. Emma tucked it into her notebook, her chest tightening with gratitude. But Richard was harder to ignore. He lingered nearby, leaning against a desk, his voice carrying just enough to reach her. "Big day for our farm girl," he said to no one in particular, though his eyes flicked toward her. "Hope she doesn't freeze up in front of the board. They don't hand out second chances." A few people chuckled awkwardly, but most kept their heads down. Emma felt the sting, but this time she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She lifted her chin, met his eyes, and said evenly, "Thanks for the advice." Richard smirked and walked away, but the silence that followed told Emma she'd surprised him. She turned back to her notebook, flipping through the pages filled with late-night scribbles. Every number, every idea suddenly felt heavier, like it carried her entire future inside its lines. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed the notebook closed, For a moment, doubt surged. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe she was about to embarrass herself in front of the most powerful people in the company. Maybe she should have kept her head down like she promised herself that first morning. But then she thought of Sarah's message, of her brother back home waiting to hear if she'd made it, of the promise she'd carried all the way from that bus ride into the city. She whispered under her breath, the same words that had kept her going all week. "Don't let them scare you." Her computer chimed with a new email. The subject line read, "Board meeting, 1 hour." Emma's pulse quickened. She slid the notebook into her bag, stood and straightened her jacket. Around her, the office buzzed with routine tasks, but for her, every sound seemed muffled, every step heavy with meaning. She walked toward the conference room doors, her heart pounding harder with each step. The boardroom felt colder than the rest of the building, all glass walls and polished wood. A long table stretched across the room, lined with serious faces, each person with folders stacked neatly in front of them. Emma stood at the edge, her notebook pressed to her chest, her heart beating so loudly she wondered if they could hear it. For a moment she wanted to turn around and run, but then she thought of the diner back home, the endless nights she'd spent serving coffee, the promise she made to her brother before she left. "I'll make it worth it." That promise was the only reason her feet didn't move backward. Gloria gave her a small nod from across the room. "Go ahead, Emma." Her palms were damp, but she opened the notebook and stepped forward. "Thank you for letting me share this," she began, her voice unsteady at first. She clicked to the first slide on the laptop, one she had prepared long before she knew she'd have the courage to show anyone. She walked them through her research, pointing out how much money was being wasted on campaigns that weren't connecting, how small shifts in focus could double their reach. At first, the board members watched her cautiously, their arms folded, their pens still. But as she spoke, heads tilted, pens began to move. One man adjusted his glasses and asked a question, and Emma answered without hesitation. Her voice grew stronger with each word. She wasn't the nervous girl hiding in a corner anymore. She was someone who had earned her place in this room. When she finished, silence hung in the air. Emma closed her notebook, waiting for the weight of judgment to fall. Then Gloria spoke. "This is exactly the kind of perspective we've been missing." One of the older board members nodded slowly. Fresh, practical, and clearly thought through. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realised she was holding. Relief washed over her, warm and dizzying. At the far end of the table, Richard sat stiffly, his usual smirk gone. He busied himself with his laptop, tapping at keys no one had asked him to touch. He didn't look at her. He didn't say a word. Emma gathered her notebook and stepped out of the boardroom, her knees trembling but her heart lighter than it had been in days. Out in the hallway, the young intern who had stood up for her earlier gave a quick smile, small but full of meaning. She smiled back, realising something important. This moment wasn't about proving Richard wrong. It wasn't even about impressing the board. It was about proving to herself that she could stand tall, that she belonged here. Later that evening, as she left the building and the city lights flickered on, her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah lit the screen. "How was your day?" Or Emma typed back slowly, her hands steady now. They finally listened. She slipped the phone into her pocket, lifted her head toward the skyline and whispered to herself, "For the first time, I feel like I belong." At the end of the day, Emma's story reminds us of something simple but powerful. Respect is not handed out freely. It's earned when we choose to speak up, even when fear tells us to stay silent. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room holds the truth everyone else has overlooked. So here's the question for you. If you were in Emma's shoes, would you have stayed quiet to avoid the risk? Or would you have taken the chance to stand and be heard? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And as always, thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, this is Rain Inside. See you in the next story.